Today, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told the European Union that his country will not make changes to its anti-terror laws in return for visa-free travel, saying, "We'll go our way, you go yours." His comments come a day after Turkey's Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, who had negotiated the deal with the EU, announced he was stepping down. For more on the larger implications, I'm joined now by Joshua Walker, formerly a senior advisor at the State Department, who's now a transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund. So, Joshua, so many threads, but why is Turkey's president saying that he is not going to make changes to his anti-terror law when it was agreed that he would as part of this migrant deal with the EU?
I think that there's a pattern developing here where President Erdogan feels that he has no constraints on him and he's able to say and do whatever he believes, and there's not a good cop to balance this. Davutoglu was the one who struck the EU deal. It was made by Turkey, but there were some disagreements behind the scenes that ultimately led to the removal of Prime Minister Davutoglu the other day.
But does President Erdogan feel that he's got the EU over a barrel, that they really need the migrant deal to stop the flow of migrants into their countries? And it does seem to be working to some degree, so he can get away with this.
I do think that when you look at the balance of power here, it is certainly in Turkey's favor. The European leaders and politicians, including Merkel and others, have come through Ankara and explained how important this is to them. And there's clearly a case in which the president can say, we're going to do it our way. If you're going to support what we believe to be terrorists in Brussels, this is how I'm going to react. He's playing Turkish politics on a much grander scale than we've ever seen.
But he's also, isn't he, trying to move away from this parliamentary system that Turkey has had for well over 100 years. He's got rid of the Prime Minister. What happens next? Is he trying to have a complete power grab?
I mean, what's amazing about this is there's been no secret. President Erdogan has wanted a presidential system from the moment he came into the presidential office, and he has been trying to change it for a while. He had a setback last year when he lost the elections in June, but he came roaring back in November. Many of us thought he would just kind of let this lie for a little bit of time, but with Prime Minister Davutoglu's sudden resignation, it's all back into the books again, and he's going to push forward. He is going to push for this. He's telling everyone that this is what he's going to do. He's telegraphing it.
But what does it mean for the European Union, for America, to have an authoritarian leader in Turkey, which is literally the bridge between Europe and Asia in an increasingly unstable region?
I think we have to look at ourselves and try to understand, how did we go wrong? How is it that the EU and Turkey, which has always been one of the bulwarks in the region, whether it's from the NATO time to the current period of time, we need to look at ourselves and understand, how do we get to where we are? Because right now, President Erdogan is able to negotiate in a transactional matter, as opposed to saying we're going to understand the values and kind of honor the spirit of the EU transaction at this point in time.
Well, does the Syrian conflict also give him leverage with Washington?
Absolutely. Washington needs Turkey more than it ever has. I also think the Turks might be miscalculating how important they are to Washington. It's clear that the issue of the Kurds in northern Syria, the question of how long Assad will stay in, Ankara and Washington have not agreed on this, but it seems to me that as we look for a peace solution in Syria, there's no way to get around the fact that Turkey has a large role to play here, and Erdogan's going to use that as he moves forward.
Because isn't he most concerned about the Kurdish question within his own country and on his borders, as opposed to President Assad and what's going on in wider Syria?
Absolutely. This is a new Turkey. We used to believe that Turkish domestic politics wouldn't affect the foreign policy as much. Now it seems that all aspects of Turkish foreign policy are domestic, and what we see Erdogan doing and saying in Turkey is having ramifications far beyond in a way we wouldn't have calculated a couple years ago.
Can anything stop his presidential ambitions?
I think at this point in time, the people can stop him in terms of an election. It seems to me we're heading towards an early election. Without Prime Minister Davutoglu as his caretaker, whoever comes in next is not going to have the level of legitimacy that Davutoglu enjoyed, so we're going to have to see what the elections. And Erdogan has never lost an election. So the question is, how will we move forward? And the Turkish people might give him that mandate that maybe people are surprised by.
Fascinating. Joshua Walker, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, as always.